Yeah, so that was really interesting, wasn't it, you guys? I mean, I think it was just powerful what's going on right
Yes.
now. Oh,
Wow.
hey, everybody. This is
Hey.
Auntie Paige, and this is We Are Your Aunties.
Hello.
I'm here tonight with Auntie Rosemarie and Auntie Genoa, and a special guest tonight, our executive producer and also a cultural commentator out in the world. He is DY. Thank you for joining us tonight, and we're going to go ahead and get started.
Thank
We
you.
missed
Thank
you.
you.
Last week we
Yeah.
had a replay on about the school to prison pipeline. So go back and catch that if you didn't catch it. But tonight, whoa, we are about to have a topic that is blowing up all of social media and everywhere else. And it is about, I say, the Tennessee 2. People are calling them the Tennessee 3, but that we'll get into as we go into the conversation. So how are you, ladies and gentlemen?
Oh my goodness. I am so excited to be here.
Great,
Always
great.
excited. Always.
Ready to go?
Oh yeah.
Okay. So as always,
Yes.
I want to go ahead
I'm
and read a little
always
bit out of the
excited to
book.
watch.
You're always excited to watch? Yay,
I'm
two.
always
That's
excited
right.
to watch.
Yeah,
Now I get
two.
to be
Our
here.
Facebook users say, yeah, two. Tennessee 2. Because only 2 were expelled. We're going to get into that in just a minute. So before we get into that, I'm going to get into this. I'm going to go into Healing the Wounds of American Slavery, the book by yours truly, myself, Paige Mean Topper. And we're going to go to page 66, and we're going to talk about what I think was one of the main culprits in this entire situation. Okay? You tell me if you think you know what it is by the time I finish reading. I think you will. So I say on page 66, more than anything, fear was used to keep our ancestors in bondage. In slave narratives, we learn of threats, acts of dismemberment, such as chopping off of fingers, hands, toes, feet, and other parts of their bodies, including male reproductive organs. Our people were threatened with malicious beatings for minor infractions like eating too much, eating too little, moving too quickly, or too slowly. Anything could lead to torture. Fear was deliberately planted into their minds, hearts, and souls, like seeds that grew internal turmoil, stress, worry, anxiety, trauma, a churning toxicity in their bellies because they did not know and they could not guess what would happen from 1 minute to the next, or even if their lives would end in the very next seconds. Can you bring the music down just a taste? And so fear of the unknown chewed away at their insides. Our ancestors learned to read slave masters' moods, voices, body language, and actions. Their minds were preoccupied by continuous monitoring, calculating, strategizing, and vigilance, survival tactics. But it doesn't end here. The very nature of fear is pervasive, and we can't look at one part without seeing the rest. We also have to factor in the fear that often eludes our contemplation. I'm talking about the slave owners' fears. As a consequence of their abuse of other human beings, slave owners constantly feared retaliation, rebellion, and revenge. They feared that the same violence, abuse, and torture they inflicted on the enslaved would be repaid to them and their families. And so their fears were multiplied and transferred onto the enslaved, who then internalized it all. In other words, in addition to their own fears, our ancestors also swallowed the fears of their oppressors. What are we talking about here?
We're talking about the oppressors. I feel like they had that Nat Turner fear.
Got it.
Because when you do something to someone, you're going to automatically expect, especially if it's already in your DNA, if you do something wrong to someone, you're going to be in fear of retaliation. You're going to be in fear of being stabbed or strangled to death in your sleep. You're not going to be able to walk around, so you're going to constantly keep a community in fear, in bondage, enslavement. You're gonna do that. So that's what I call the Nat Turner fear, because they were afraid that he was going to come and kill them in their sleep. But it's not about that. It's about that fear that we were talking about, because love, the opposite of love, is fear, because all of those things are born out of the lack of love.
Mm. And how about, as you were talking, I thought, when you are in fear, a person is in fear, a generation is in fear about something they've done, and they fear the retaliation of the ones they've done it to, and they're still living among each other, that they might teach the next generation to also fear Black people, right? And so are they here now fearing Black men? And these two Black men in the chamber, in the well of the House of Representatives in Tennessee?
Well,
just asking.
I was going to say, this is what I see, because the first thing they do is because there's nothing worse than being hyper vigilant in every area of your life. It's very exhausting. But every time a Black leader in any genre rose up, they had to make sure that this person, if they weren't indoctrinated, they had to destroy them, because that strong voice will give strength to the other ones that otherwise wouldn't rise up if they have somebody that's just like, oh, let's just go along. Like, oh yeah, we got somebody that we can get behind, and they can't have those. It's taken so long to get everything kind of like how it was. All it takes is one strong voice crying in the wilderness. Think John the Baptist.
right.
To make major changes. And some things have to be incremental to get people to do it. And if you have strong voices, especially the voices of our Black men,
yes,
it's their natural, just the natural strength,
right,
people to listen and follow.
Right. And those were the voices that they tried to silence the most in enslavement. Was the voice of Black men. You know what somebody said in Facebook user group, that they fear Black people in general, both men and women, and especially the men, because as Genoa was saying, like the strength of the men. That's why there's so many of our men incarcerated, and they go in on these bogus charges, and they're in there forever. And it really doesn't make sense, but it makes sense to those who fear us and are trying to keep us encapsulated in this little bubble of fear ourselves. But these two men, their names are Justin Jones and Justin Pearson. They're both around the age of 28, both representatives in the House of Representatives in Tennessee. And most people know the story. If they don't, then, essentially these two men were representing their combined 136,000 constituents. And as they were in the discussions about gun control, because of six murders that occurred in their state, they were in the House, and they were having a discussion about gun control, and the House kept on silencing their microphones. And so that's why they brought a bullhorn into the well, so that they could be heard. And so that was the act of defiance, and that was the we talked about it when we talked about bucking authority. They decided to buck authority, and we know that sometimes has consequences. But, sometimes we have to be willing to take the consequences of what we do in order to be heard. So I'm not saying that it was right or wrong or any of those things, but it's just what happened. Right. And I think that they got very afraid of those two young men. And also because they brought people with them. They weren't alone. And there was a white woman who was standing with them, which is kind of unusual, especially in the southern states. So somebody says that they still fear it. They still fear retaliation. And yes,
absolutely.
So go ahead.
No, it's it's the same thing. It's because it's in its DNA and it's passed on. That same retaliation, that same fear, that same I'm gonna hurt. That's just passed along. And but the main thing is we are being silenced. Anytime there's an act of so-called defiance, that's calling it. That's what they're calling it. But it is just standing up, just like you said with the two guys that raised their fists in the air, just saying Black and proud, and that was they went years of being death threats and taking their medals away and different things like that. And it's the same thing. It's just another time.
And that was in the late 1960s. And interestingly, there's an image of both of the Justins with their fists raised as well.
Exactly.
So that just, the optics on that tells us that we are still living among those who oppressed and violated our ancestors in the worst way, and that we're still fighting the same battles because the fears still exist.
Yes.
One of the things that you said, I wanted to elaborate on, they said that, I read somewhere that their expulsion was equivalent to beating and punishing a leader publicly during slavery. And that was the point I was making, is that they were trying to make an example of these two young men, which is really interesting in this time and day when we're supposed to be living in a post-racial society, according to some, right?
You know what I find very interesting, sister, Auntie Paige?
What?
Is that if you look at the numbers, because usually when people go into politics, they're in there for a long time. And we're talking two strapping, young, smart Black men in their 20s. How many years would they have to turn things around if they're already coming out the gate sprung?
No, you didn't say strapping.
I know. Yes, they sure are.
You prime strapping young Negro.
Yeah, because we have a lot of young strapping young people, male and female, that's very opinionated and they're ready to take charge. But when you silence when the leaders that we have out there to silence, it's to spread fear for the other ones that would stand up. And they have to decide, is it worth taking the L for the greater good?
Right. And you have such a great point, too, because if you heard these two young men speak,
I did.
You would hear the power and the eloquence, and you hear the echoes of John Lewis, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, Ralph Ellison, Angela Davis. We hear the voices of the people whose shoulders they stand upon, which brings up another point. That was a great point. And I'm making fun of the word strapping because as I read the slave testimonies, that comes up a lot when they were trying to sell Black people. That's why I was like, wait a minute. But so I wanted to bring up something that Bakari Sellers, I don't know if he's an employee of CNN. I didn't really research that deeply. I saw him appear on CNN, and he was either appearing as a commentator or a guest. I think it was a guest. His name is Bakari Sellers. And one of the things that he said was most disturbing to me, and it had to do with exactly what we're talking about. One generation standing on the shoulders of the next. He said, this generation is starting to show through what it looks like to stand for what is right. And it made me cringe. Because for me, that statement is divisive. It takes us back to the Willie Lynch letter, right? And that caste system of the young against the old, the light against the dark, the field Negroes against the house Negroes. It takes us back to that system. And while he's trying to bring some light, right, and enlightenment to the topic, and I get his point, but to say that this generation is starting to show through what it looks like to stand for what is right, then what was the generation prior doing? Were we just kind of sitting on our hands?
It's a little deeper.
We were busy building the foundation, as were the aunties' ancestors and D1 ancestors. They were building the foundation to provide the means for these young men to stand up and do what others who preceded them have always done.
That's correct.
We have to be careful of that.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, I was just going to say it's absolutely correct because I feel like he mischose his words. It should have been like the young generation, they are continuing to do what those before them have done. Because it's not just starting now. You know, this whole fear of, of Black people coming into a teeny tiny bit of power is not starting. I mean, how long ago was it? About almost 30 years ago, Public Enemy had an album called Fear of a Black Planet.
Right.
Mhm.
I mean, that didn't come from nowhere.
No.
So
Yeah,
Yeah.
you know what? I tell you what we were busy doing. We were busy fighting, dying, crying, getting bombed, going through different towns, our children missing, hung, being set afire. We were busy protesting our lives, for our lives. You couldn't even sit in church without fear of that they're going to blow up the church. So we
Right.
were fighting, and we were a community, and we still are a community, and we're fighting, and we need these young men and all the young men and women that's getting out there doing what they need to do, because we're standing on the shoulders of the generations before,
That's right.
and without those people going out there marching, where people came up to you and water hosed you in public on the news, all the things that they did, they was like, we're gonna do or die. We're just like James Brown. We're tired of living on our knees.
Yeah.
We're going to stand up for what is right for us.
Yeah. Yeah. I believe that. And I just think that with the bottom line of what they were trying to do, because when we really look, it's so not about even the legislators who were in the well that day. It's nothing to do really at the end of the day with these two Black men. It has to do with marginalizing, right?
Yeah.
The votes and the democratic protections of Black people.
Yeah.
And so if they can silence us on any level, then they can silence us on every level.
True.
But I think what's important is that with We Are Your Aunties, Healing the Wounds of American Slavery, this whole movement is intergenerational. And so my point is that we all need each other. And just like Auntie Rose just said, we absolutely need our young people too. Auntie Genoa's point, because these two young men are 28 years old. Who else in those chambers or in that well was 28 years old that day? I don't think you need one. They're all old, and they're all white males, particularly. There were a few females, but they are threatened by that power.
Yes.
And they're threatened by that energy, and they're threatened by that intelligence. Because it's one thing to be strong, but to be strong and intelligent and courageous, that's what I saw more than anything else.
Yes.
Was the courage. One of the White House legislators said that Justin Pearson, he's the one with the afro, and Justin Jones is the one with the ponytail. So he was telling Justin Jones he was telling Justin Pearson, the one with the afro, that he was throwing a tantrum when he brought in the bullhorn. And so in essence, the metaphor of a tantrum is that that's what children do. And so he's calling this Black man
a child,
a boy. That's what
It-
he's doing.
It goes back to the demeaning vernacular of saying, "Hey, boy." I mean, that's what they used to say. So it's like to lessen the impact of what a Black man is. It's the same thing. So it's a remix of the same things that keep happening.
Wow, I like that. A remix. That's exactly what it is. And it's definitely the residual effects of slavery playing out again. And that's why a lot of people don't want to talk about slavery. Let's just start from where we are and just catapult to the next level and do what we need to do. Get these bags. Like money is all there is, right?
You can't do it.
Right. Can't do it.
Because when I was talking to young people, and I'm telling them about the choices that they make, thinking about their future, the one thing I used to tell them all the time is stay off the plantation. I said, plantation? What plantation? The prison system, the jail.
Yes.
Because that's where everything moved to. It moved from the physical plantations with the greenery and the cotton and everything to the prison system, because they run multi-billion-dollar businesses out of all the prison systems in this country.
Definitely. And you know what? Actually, our next show next week is going to be about the mass incarceration system. And, it's interesting the role that the Clintons played in that.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, the 3 strikes you're out bill.
Oh my God. And the super predator and all of that. So here are two Black men, two beautiful, strong Black men, articulate, intelligent and present and aware of exactly what they're talking about and who they're serving and what their duties are as a public servant.
Yes.
And
willing to take an L,
willing to take their consequences,
Mhm.
and compared to, what the Tennessee legislators were probably used to, which is we can put our thumb on you and jail you and incarcerate you at any time that we feel like it. But these two young men are obviously raised very well.
Yes.
And really they passed that mark of most Black men not surviving past a certain age.
Yes. Yes.
But they survived.
Yes.
Hello, Jacqueline. Jacqueline has a comment. She says, Johnson revealed the comments by her white colleagues away from the camera. Don't just bring back the firing squad. Let's bring back hanging. She said that?
Wow.
The white woman?
Wow.
Oh, she revealed the comments by her white colleagues that they were talking about off camera is what she's saying.
Okay, so she
don't
was
just bring back the firing squad. Let's bring back hanging.
So she was still covered them because she knows she was covered. She didn't leave.
We have to give her credit where credit is due. I mean, because how many, and this is what we need. We need covering of each other. But right now,
we need those allies.
We need the allies.
Yes.
We need the allies, because Black people, we're so benevolent, let me tell you, and protective of that. It's just our nature to be benevolent and protective. And so we're always protecting others. But then when it's time for us to be protected, where are they? So this was a great demonstration by Ms. Johnson, that she did have these two Black men covered. And also Kamala Harris. I was very impressed by what she had to say about, and it wasn't even so much what she had to say, it was the position that she took in protecting and loving on these two Black men. That she went to their aid. There have been so many times when legislators, presidents, vice presidents, and otherwise have not come out and directly supported and protected our Black men. As the two get it reinstated, hopefully a redo on meaningful gun violence discussion can take place in the Tennessee chamber. Hopefully it can. And there's already legislation it's being brought through right now. Let's see, I had a note on that. So the legislation was drafted already, but they were about to go on break. And so it went to a delayed bills committee is what they call it. The legislation had gone to a delayed bills committee. And so it was because they had gone beyond the bill filing date. And so they're still in discussion. These two young men are still in discussion because they want to bring the bill to the floor or push the bill through, given the violence in that murder of those 6 people in Tennessee, the Tennessee school. But it just kind of crossed at the same time. It just happened to cross at the same time. But it doesn't even matter. You don't turn off somebody's microphone when they're attempting to speak. If you're so solid in your position and what you're talking about, then have a debate. Be willing to have a debate. Yeah. You don't shut people off completely. But again, that's putting them in a child's position. What do older people tell young people sometimes?
You stay in a child's place.
You're to be seen and not heard, right?
Yeah. And if their point wasn't valid, there wouldn't have been no need to turn the mics off. If they were saying didn't have any validity.
And I want to know, why did they feel the need to have a bullhorn ready? Because that's not standard practice.
Well, no, the two young men had the bull. They brought the bullhorn because for weeks their mics had been shut off when they got ready to speak. So they brought the bullhorn so they could be heard.
I know. That's what I mean.
I see. Yeah. Why bring that? Yeah. Why? What was there a need for? If there wasn't any foul play, I see what you're saying.
Exactly.
Yeah. So Jacqueline was just clearing up that yes, she would by her colleagues. These things were said by her colleagues. She's standing with the two. The civil rights would never happen without the help of some whites. You know what? That's true. That's absolutely true. A lot of whites marched all the way back in 55 when Rosa Parks died. And they marched in the 60s. Yes. I don't know what's tickling at my brain though, is that whole conversation about why they reinstated the one brother with the slick hair. But there aren't any public conversations even about reinstating the brother with the afro.
Yeah.
And I
Wow.
think it has a lot to do with optics, like how they see us when we wear our hair a certain way. That's also a
Mhm.
conversation. It could be very intimidating to them for someone to have an afro, because for them, that's a political statement. And it
Exactly.
is. And it is.
It absolutely is. The thing about it is, it goes back to the 70s. I mean, people started to wear the afro in order to speak out. I mean, when James Brown came out with the song "Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud," now everybody's going away from slicking their hair and and pressing it and like getting like processes to
Yeah.
make their hair more European. They're getting away from that. They're like, okay, let's do it natural. We're going to pick it out and just wear our hair the way it grows out of our head.
But the
Right.
thing is,
And
why
and
so
and we still go through this today.
Yeah.
Today, there are still children who can't participate in sports due to the way that their hair naturally grows out of their head. You know, there are kids who can't. There were kids who were denied marching with their class
I
in
know.
graduations due to the natural way their hair grows out of their head.
Mhm.
And here we are in 2023, and we're still dealing with this.
Yeah. Yeah.
okay,
So
but
then
to
how do we
speak
get
to
to the
that,
bottom of it?
but to
I'm
speak
sorry. Go
to
ahead
Exactly.
on
that,
to
DY,
Janella.
but to speak to that, DY,
Hmm.
I happen to met and been around and have in my family people that have children that are bi racial, but I call them multicultural because God only created one race, and that's the human, that's mankind. But they when they're young, it's okay for them to wear their hair like it grows out of their hair. They're not they even my baby sister, her hair would be combed when she left, when she went to go spend time with her grandmother and her father's side of the family, and she'd always come back with her hair like like,
Hmm.
oh my God. And I'm thinking, because it was my job to keep her hair combed, and we're talking about combing it out, and I was like, oh, that.
So you've got this young man with this afro, and underneath this afro is the brilliance of all times in terms
Hmm.
of just his processing of what was occurring and his ability to relay that conversationally where people could really understand it without him being absolutely disrespectful, which is what he had been disrespected. And so, that combination of radicalism in the hairstyle, right? And then the intellectualism and the poise of the way that he was relaying his conversation and his points was just too much. It was too much. And so they again reinstated Justin Jones, right? But they have yet to even talk about publicly reinstating Justin Pearson. And the other thing too is when they reinstated Justin Jones today, they reinstated him to an intermediary position in his own seat rather than a complete reinstatement. I thought that was really interesting too, because they say that they had the law to expel them, which was insane over what they did. That should have been like a back hall conversation. Don't ever do that again type of thing.
Exactly.
Or
So
at
he
least
was
chambers or something. But at the same, okay, so what was I saying? Oh, I was saying that, what was I saying? I lost
you
my
were
point
talking
completely.
about
You're
he
talking
was
about
he,
the
his
conversation. Have
feet is
a backroom
restricted.
conversation.
Oh, right. That the intermediary reinstatement. So that if they can totally expel them, then they need to bring them back in totality, not in increments. Because
Exactly.
that's
Right.
sending a message as well.
Oh yeah, it's
It's
definitely.
almost like saying that, okay, I'm bringing you back, but you're on probation. We're going to make sure that you're going to be good. Before we give you the freedom to
I
do
think which
things
is what
again.
they should have done in the first place. Because when I first heard expulsion, I was thinking in terms of suspension. Like
Me
this will be
too.
for a
Mhm.
set period of time. You'll learn your lesson and then you'll come back. Because again, they did buck authority. They did break the rules. Okay, I get that. So something should happen. But should it be total expulsion? No. And in
No.
bringing them back, since it was total expulsion, then I think it should have been total reinstatement with the stipulation of suspension.
Yes.
What do you all think?
No, I totally agree. I totally agree. It's the same thing. It's putting him out in front and giving him, now watch it. That type of in front of the world. Because I feel like that he should. I don't want to say a tap on the wrist, but I really feel like they should have gotten both of them, full reinstatement. Because if your mics are being turned off, if you can't, if the world can't hear, or the people that is voting can't hear,
Right.
then what are they going to do? They just wanted to be heard. That's anybody. If you just want to be heard, it's not like they set a place on fire. They didn't storm a place. They didn't go and tear and break out windows. They didn't do that. They just wanted to be heard, and they have a right to be heard.
Let me tell you what it is.
They didn't storm the Capitol with rifles and guns and Confederate flags.
No, they did.
Figurehead status. So they'll put them in front so people see them, but then they're doing what they want to do in the background.
Yeah. So the day after this expulsion happened, I read that the combination between the two Justins, Justin Pearson and Justin Jones, their total constituency combined is 136,000 residents. So that begs the question for me. When we look at someone in fear, right? It was someone's fear that caused them, or a collective body's fear that caused them to expel these two young Black men. And they were willing to do that. Now they too, these other state representatives, they too are representatives of constituencies in Tennessee, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they were willing to let 136,000 residents go without representation to quell their own fears about what these two young, beautiful, strong, Black, intelligent men would do.
Right.
So what does that say about, if we take a deeper dive, like into the wounds of American slavery, what does that say about fear in relationship to what's happening in our current culture? That they would let a personal fear, because that's what it boiled down to, in my opinion.
Mine too.
A personal fear impose on the democratic system to the extent that 136,000 people in their state, their home state, went without representation, and are still going without representation under Justin Pearson because his seat's empty.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. What does that say about it?
For me, it's still the same thing. That fear that's embedded in them, waiting for the Nat Turner to show up. And we're beyond that. I mean, we are beyond that. These intelligent men were just only speaking their piece, which they have a right to. And it's only because they was not heard. Even the people should even listen to this. They were not heard. Their mics were cut off. Their mics were silent. What would you do? Continue to sit on your hands? Right. They had to take a stand, and a bullhorn wasn't taking a stand.
Yeah. This has been going on for a long time too. I remember stories of Bobby Seale when he was on trial in California for, I don't know if it was for gun carry. I forget exactly what it was. I would have to look that up again. But this man was on trial in the 1970s. We're not talking about the 1800s, the 1970s. And this judge, because this man continued to try to speak for his rights and speak into the microphone from the lawyer's desk, his attorney's desk in the courtroom, he put a gag order on Bobby Seale. And when I say gag order, they literally gagged Bobby Seale and chained his arms and legs to a chair in the courthouse.
Exactly.
So this is nothing new.
No.
And I believe that if they thought they could get away with it, they would have done something similar to these two young Black men, but they did it through their legal system, which was the expulsion. It's the same thing though, because the whole world is watching.
Watching.
Jacqueline says their antics backfired and their true colors of racism were revealed. There should have never been an expulsion. By the way, I'm reminded of Malcolm at times listening to Pearson. Both are amazing. They're stunning. They're stunning. Their oratory skills are far above par.
Impeccable. Yes.
Far above par.
Yes. They have that type of speech that commands the ears of the room. You stop and listen. You stop and listen to either one of them when they speak because you want to hear what they have to say.
Right.
And what they have to say is so profound.
It is so profound. And let me tell you about what Jacqueline's comment, because their antics backfired in more than one way. Yes, it's all exposed, but watch this. They were trying to silence those two Black men. But as a consequence of their antics, as she said, now they're on a national and international stage.
Yes.
When the Vice President of the United States comes to speak to you and your group, your constituency personally about a particular issue, you've gotten the attention of the world.
Yes. Yes.
So that's what fear does, though. Fear backs you into a corner. It causes your inner belief system to be exposed at the end of the day. So I just wanted to bring that up in terms of the fear. Another thing that I noticed is that really it wasn't just an attack on those two men. It was really an assault on the democracy of all Black people when you think about it.
Yes.
Absolutely. Because again, they were put up as an example. So any other comments about what happened? About this minor infraction that ended up being this major expulsion? And what that says about our society, what that says about our culture.
Nothing's changed. I mean, we're going to say that things have changed, but it's just a different way of doing things. You know, you use technology as opposed to a whip, or you use some sort of whatever the day is that people are doing these days. It's the same thing. It's just on another platform.
Different instruments.
And things are, and people always say, well, things have changed. Things have changed. But if you look at everything as a whole, how, especially in the wounds of American slavery, you can see that people are still afraid. They're still waiting. They're still wanting to keep a person down, a people down. They want to stay in front. They want to put their faces, names, and everything, and keep their culture above everyone else. And you can't do that when you have a world of different cultures and different races of people.
So the bottom line sounds like it's the fear of power, fear of losing power.
It is.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm going to go ahead and say that, I'm going to say it like this. The actions of this minor infraction have caused a distraction. Because here's the thing. We're talking about what's going on with these two young men, right?
Right.
The conversation about what they were talking about has ceased.
Right.
What were they speaking about? What is the root of the issue? Why were they, what was the root? We're not talking about that. We're so focused right now on what they did.
On what they did. I like that.
Yes. So we're distracted.
The small infraction caused the distraction from what it was that they literally went in to talk about, which was gun control. That was really what the issue was. But now it's and more, all of this stuff is surfacing, but it's always been here since the inception of this country. I shared a video with the aunties and with DY about, it was Michael Moore, a long time ago, Michael Moore, the documentarian who did a documentary on the Columbine incident when the two student gunmen went in and killed a bunch of kids in Colorado. And he did just a short cartoon within the documentary. And it shows how fear works. And so essentially it starts out in Europe, right? With the pilgrims wanting to come to a new world because their fear of persecution was at stake. So they were afraid of persecution. So they come over and they start a new world. The colonies, the Americas, right? But at that time, it was the New World. They get here and they find out there are natives here, Native Americans. And so their fear of the Native Americans caused them to start killing and displacing all of the Native Americans. Then that wasn't enough. They still their fears still weren't quelled. Now they're in a fight with the British, who are wanting to come over and take over the New World, right? So then they start killing the British. Then they instate the Second Amendment, which says that only white men can have guns in this country. So then they decide, okay, we've killed all the natives and we've gotten beyond the education that they gave us to survive. So now we've got to go get someone to cultivate this land and make a profit for us, right? And so they go get slaves. They go all the way to Africa to get slaves, and they take with them their what? Their guns. And then it was their fear then of the slaves, as we talked about, after the slaves were freed, after 250 years of slavery, 400 years later, they're still afraid of us. But Samuel Colt created the gun, right? The Colt gun that would fire more than one shot at a time. So then after that, this is all in Michael Moore's documentary. I recommend it highly that you go and watch at least the cartoon. Then the Civil War comes about to free the slaves, right? And so now it's still about freedom, but it's about fear, because when the slaves are freed, that's when the KKK came into play to keep these Negroes at bay and in place and keep them down and depressed, right? And debased, so that they can't empower themselves to survive and thrive. At the same time the KKK comes about, the NRA comes about. So now they institute a law that says it's illegal for they reinstitute the law. It's illegal for Black men to have guns. Black people have guns. And so then when 1955 comes about, Rosa Parks sits down, the civil rights movement arises, and now it's dogs and water hoses and still guns and still oppression and violence against Black people. Why? Because they don't want to lose power. It's the fear of losing power, privilege, position. That's what it comes down to. And so then how do we have that conversation? As a nation, not just Black people, but as a nation. How do we have that conversation without changing people's hearts? Because it's the heart that leads the mind to do what it does. If there's fear in the heart, now the mind has to concoct a position and a way of being that will keep other people disempowered. So how do we reach the hearts of people?
I'd say you have to reach the hearts of those with the fear. Those ones that have fear, I mean, somehow they have to get over that fear. One thing I read, and I've already said that, that the people in power in America, they better be glad that Black people only want justice and not revenge.
How about it?
Because that's all we've since abolishment of slavery. That's all Black people ever wanted, was they just wanted justice. They want freedom and justice. We didn't say, okay, you know what? Y'all let us go. All right, we had to do this for a few hundred years. Let's get revenge. Let's turn the tables. Because that's what they thought that was going to happen. They thought that, okay, now it's going to be our turn. We're going to come and take what you got. But no, that's not in our nature. We just wanted our own thing. And the thing is, and every time we've tried to get our own thing, they take it away.
From the fear,
they still fear us. Black Wall Street, we were minding our own business.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? They have to come and take it away from us. So it's still that fear. So the only way it's going to change is getting to the root of that fear.
Yeah. And we're not all the same, Black people, So there are those who do want revenge. I don't claim to speak for them. I don't claim to speak for them. There are those who want revenge. There are those who would inflict violence. I mean, and I can't blame them. Is that my way? No, but I can't blame them. I get it. When you feel like you have no more recourse, there's nothing else left to do but to fight in that way. But there are ways to fight in other ways. And I don't necessarily think it's going to come through politics necessarily. But I like what you said about affecting the hearts and the minds of those who are in politics. And so the only way to do that is with the truth. And the
Mhm.
truth is that we are still living under the residual effects of American slavery and all that was done. And there are others who are forming to speak to the different ways or different factions of Black people and how we're each addressing it in our own way or in different groups, segmented groups, is, there's the reparations. Like, and that's a rightful way to take care of people who you've robbed,
Right.
is to replace above and beyond. What does the word of God says? It says if you're robbed, then the thief is to repay 7 times, sevenfold.
Mhm. Mhm.
And they can
Yes.
never really calculate how much was stolen from our ancestors,
No.
because it wasn't just in the form of economics and finances. It was in the form of mental health. It was in the form of violence and death and suicide and a
Mhm.
lot of different things across the board.
Mhm.
So can they ever really repay that? No. But, to give someone a voice,
Mhm.
to allow someone to have their voice, to empower people to have their voice, especially when that person is an elected official. The 139,000 constituents in Tennessee said, we want these two brothers in office to be a
Right.
voice for us.
Yes.
And so you're not just shutting down their voices, you're shutting down all of the 139,000 voices.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so there will always be a fraction afraid of those they deem different. We can't concern ourselves with changing them, but rather containing them through our votes and our voices. Yeah, our votes and our voices are powerful.
Mm.
Yes and no. Because even when we do get certain legislation put through, it's overridden by just the violence,
Mhm.
the
The ignorance.
by just overriding.
Mhm.
For example, there's certain police policies. You're not supposed to use a certain chokehold. They did it anyway and killed our
Mhm.
people. You're supposed to de-escalate a situation according to the policies and the laws of this land before you go in with your stun gun or whatever that's called now, or your literal gun. Before you kill or hurt or bring harm, you're supposed to de-escalate and use your tools, use your training to
Mhm.
de-escalate those situations. So is it really going to come through policy?
No.
Not always. Absolutely not. Especially when you're dealing with police. There are laws in place that are supposed to protect us. Even if they're implemented, they wouldn't protect us. Not even in court, even if it's on the book. I believe there's a law. It's what Plessy versus Ferguson.
Right.
That says that you have the right to defend yourself, even if it means taking a peace officer's life when it comes to unlawful arrest.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
How many times do we see people try to defend themselves when being arrested unlawfully, and it always ends badly for that person?
Always rally. Yeah.
And the person that peace officer that does it ends up getting at most a slap on the wrist.
Mhm.
Board
We've seen it
versus
time and
Brown.
time.
Yeah, Board versus
Exactly.
Brown.
Yeah.
It's been on the books forever. Equality in the school system. This school deserves the same, books and the same education, the same level of expertise that this school has. But do we see that across the board in America?
Nope.
No.
Absolutely not. As a matter of fact, they started busing kids from the urban areas into the suburbs to take advantage of those schools, but then that takes them out of their total environment and those who really care most about them, their community members, right? So this inequality and injustice, I don't think, it can be legislated to an extent. It can be legislated, but then the legislators who are there to govern it,
Mhm.
right, to invoke it and to keep it going, they're not always going to do that. They're always going to favor those who look like them,
Right.
Exactly.
right?
Yes. And then when you bust the kids into different neighborhoods and go to better schools, it sounds good on the surface, but then You take them, and then instead of learning history, you learn his story.
Right.
That's true.
Right.
So
And they're
that's what
even wanting to,
happens.
yeah, they're even wanting to take that out of the libraries and off the bookshelves now. Our history, which is a whole other, I
Mhm.
mean, it's, and again, it comes from fear that
Fear.
our children are going, their children, our children, white children are
Mhm.
going to learn what their ancestors did to their black friends,
Mhm. Mhm.
ancestors, and they don't want to be seen in that light. And it will also empower black children to understand the truth so that they begin to agitate and say, hey, this isn't right, and begin
Mhm.
to speak out and fight against it as well. So it's just a vicious cycle. But the only thing that I have found will begin to affect this whole system and the residual effects that slavery left behind
Mhm.
is to tell the truth,
Yes.
expose it,
Expose it.
expose it. And then what are we going to do about the truth that we find? We have to make a choice. Do we want to change our, and really, I can't change you, DY. I can't change you, Rosemary or Genoa. I can't change anyone. The truth changes people.
Mhm.
Right.
And once I know the truth, then I choose how I allow that truth to affect me.
Mhm.
So, and that's every individual. So, I would love to have a conversation with the Tennessee representatives in that house.
Yeah.
I would love to have that conversation with them. Like,
Oh
what
yes.
really happened in here that day? Let's not even talk about, the two young men, and let's not even talk about gun control. Let's talk about what happened with you. What were
Mhm.
you thinking that would
Mhm.
cause you to expel them? We need to start to have these conversations and not be
Yeah.
afraid of
Like
these
yes. Like
conversations.
what?
That's
What exactly was the button that was pushed? Yes. What was it?
fear.
That's what I want to know. Fear. Yes, fear. That's what I want to know. Fear. Fear of what? What are you afraid of?
Exactly.
The
What
stuff
are you
that was
exactly you're afraid of?
the stuff that
Fear.
was
Because
passed
because
down.
it, because they don't want your spot. They have their own spot. So what are you
Right.
afraid of?
Right. Exactly. Too many spots being taken by two different types of people. Who
Well, and
knows?
it's the 136,000 that they represent. They don't want them to rise up because the majority of them are what? Black people
Mhm.
and disenfranchised people.
You know.
Auntie Genoa, you had a comment. I'm sorry, Auntie Rose. Y'all go ahead.
You know what? It's you know what? I remember when I was in elementary school, and I just remember the United States being like on the map, being so huge, and Africa was so small. And in my mind, I was like, wow, that's really small. And the United States was as big as the chalkboard. And I mean, and those things like that, the nose is cut off, and down in history, being darker skin being replaced by lighter skin. It was that it needs to stop. The truth needs to come out. You need to stop trying to change history to something that it was not.
Right.
People need to stop it. Let's get the truth out. Why
Yes.
are you afraid?
Yes. They're
Yes.
Out.
repressing the truth. They're repressing the truth right now on simple things. I just read
Simple.
how they're really repressing the story of Rosa Parks. I mean, we talked
Oh
about her
yeah.
Oh
earlier.
my gosh.
They're really trying to change it from, it was illegal for a black woman to sit in the front, especially if a white man wanted her seat, and that's what she did. They're changing that narrative.
Yeah, you're
What are
right.
they changing it to? I'm curious. Because otherwise,
I
why would there need to be a boycott?
mhm. Yes, I read something there saying that yes, Rosa Parks was a woman who sat down and someone asked for her seat and she said no and caused a disturbance.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah. Yeah. Because
And
first
and
they
and
had the whole.
literally this is what they want to put into the textbooks in the
Yes.
state of Florida.
Yeah.
Okay, so listen. The
We're
problem
listening.
is, as a
Mhm.
black people, we are not the ones teaching our children. And so our children don't know the truth. So how can they rise up if they've been indoctrinated, number one? And number two, when the wealth that they gained from the enslaved was passed on, they also had to take oaths and stuff of what they wouldn't do. Like, okay, my sister, for instance, her family, her father's side of the family has property on a lake, okay, a exclusive lake, and in the father's her grandfather's will, there's not supposed, that property's never to be passed along or go to anybody black. So the thing is, it's they're given a charge. They're past wealth, but they have their stipulations on the wealth that they have. They have to do certain things, and they don't want to be broke. And I don't know what type of thing, what would happen if they broke whatever the wishes was of the wealth that was passed along to it. But then there's that piece too, because that's why they don't want to give reparations, because if they give reparations, they're not, if they paid what was really owed, we're talking about the intellectual property and all the things that the wealth that they got that came from the enslaved, then the situations would be reversed, because we got family that's living, that's struggling when they had ancestors that invented such wonderful stuff.
Right.
Why do you get the credit, but they can't get the money? Why don't the wealth come with that? Why are you gonna give me an empty title and I can't get paid for my intellectual property?
Right. And sometimes they didn't even get the recognition. Like a large percentage of the time. I think about, that was a great points. And I think that the thing that comes up for me is Vivian Thomas, for example, the brother who was basically a janitor in a building.
Oh yeah.
But very smart, and had access to the lab and knew one of the doctors who was working in the lab, and he was trying to come up with a solution for the blue baby syndrome. And Vivian Thomas is the one who came up with the solution, but then the white doctor took all the credit and all the money. And all the money. And I mean, there's so many stories like that. This is one we know. We can't even count the ones we don't know about.
So just think about the families that's living in poverty that should have been have wealth.
Right.
It's gone. And if they speak up, if they be honest, then they've been living a lifestyle that was never theirs to begin with. It's all stolen.
All stolen.
It's all stolen.
Exactly.
And so they're living in dust, poverty, but at the same time, they know that their intellectual wealth was robbed.
Right.
Right. And so what does that do to a person? I mean, it's very deflating and defeating. It doesn't have to be, but I'm sorry.
No, what do it do to a people?
To a people in particular, but even that individual family that comes from that bloodline, that developed that. So I think, again, it comes down to a heart issue. And I know that's a hard thing for a lot of people to hear, because most people think, there must be something we can do. We got to take action. There's something we can do, get out in the streets and protest and all of that. And those things are definitely necessary. I mean, in some respects, those things are definitely necessary. But even when you're out there protesting, like, what's happening in your heart?
Exactly. That's the thing we need to figure out. And
where's that coming from? Where's the protest coming from? I think for these two gentlemen, the two Justins, Justin Pearson and Justin Jones, I think that their hearts were definitely in the right place.
Definitely.
Oh yes, it definitely is, and I think that it's not over for them. I mean, I know. Also, I was going to say, we're almost out of time, but I just want to say that, it's not over for them. They're just beginning, and we're almost there.
Yes. And we want to thank you so much for joining us for We Are Your Aunties. Thank you for this beautiful conversation, for your participation. And we're going to see you next week when we talk about mass incarceration and its effect on the Black family. Thank you for joining us. Good night.
Bye, you guys.
Hey,
Auntie.